Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paper by economists Chari, Kehoe, and McGrattan. It asks a pretty provocative question. What if the maps our leaders use to navigate the economy are fundamentally flawed? What if the tools they rely on to make huge decisions are, well, built on some seriously shaky ground? Think about it. When you're trying to get through a storm, your life depends on an accurate map. Well, policymakers at central banks are in a similar boat. They rely on economic models as their maps for these massive decisions that affect your job, your savings, the cost of everything. So what happens if those maps are just wrong? So why is having an accurate economic map so critical? Well, because these aren't just some academic thought experiments. These models have very real-world consequences that impact all of us, from the interest rate on your mortgage to the health of the entire job market. An economic model is basically a simplified version of reality. It's meant to show how things like inflation, employment, and interest rates all connect. Now, for it to be actually useful for making policy, it has to be structural. Think of it like a map of a city's roads. If the city changes all the speed limits, the roads themselves don't just get up and move, right? A good structural model is like that. Its basic rules don't change, even when policies do, which lets you actually predict what's going to happen next. Okay, so the most sophisticated state-of-the-art map in use today is what's known as the new Keynesian model. This is the big one. It's the gold standard, used by major institutions like the European Central Bank for incredibly detailed quarter-to-quarter policy advice. It's supposed to have all the answers for our modern economy. But how do you even build one of these maps? Well, it turns out there are two competing schools of thought in economics, each with a totally different philosophy on how to make them. So on one side, you have the neoclassicals. You could call them the minimalists. They build simple, elegant models based on a few core principles to just understand the big picture. And on the other side, you've got the new Keynesians. They're kind of the perfectionists. They add tons of extra features and variables, things they call shocks, to make their models fit historical data as perfectly as possible. So the authors of this paper, who come from that neoclassical camp, decided to pop the hood on the new Keynesian model to see what was really making it tick. And what they found was pretty alarming. So here's their first major finding. A huge chunk of the model's predictive power comes from four mysterious, totally unexplained forces. The authors call them dubiously structural, which is, a very polite academic way of saying they aren't based on any solid, real-world economic principles. Now get this. According to their analysis of a major new Keynesian model, a staggering 69% of what moves employment up or down is explained by these four questionable shocks. Let that sink in. Nearly 70% of what drives jobs in this model comes from forces that are, well, as we're about to see, really hard to explain. The biggest of these mystery forces is what the authors call the labor wedge. In the model, it's called a wage markup shock, but you can just think of it as a ghost in the machine. It's basically a statistical fudge factor that's needed to mess with the normal relationship between work, pay, and spending just to make the model's answers match up with old data. And this right here is the crucial point. This one shock, this single mystery force, can be explained in two completely opposite ways. One story is that recessions are caused by a sudden wave of contagious greed, where workers demand crazy high wages and price themselves out of a job. If that's true, the policy solution is to crack down on unions. But the other story is that recessions are caused by contagious laziness. Everyone just suddenly decides they value leisure more and quits their jobs. The policy solution then? Do nothing. The economy is just giving people what they want. You've got the same data, the same shock, leading to wildly different advice. And to make things even weirder, the volatility of this key shock is, and I'm quoting the authors here, absurd. Its standard deviation is over 2,500%. That means this force is just incredibly, wildly unpredictable from one quarter to the next, which makes it basically impossible to connect to anything happening in the real world. And the other mystery forces have similar problems. The so-called exogenous spending shock is 3.5 times more volatile than actual government spending. The risk premium shock is 6 times more volatile than the interest rates it's supposed to be related to. It really seems like they're there to make the math work, not to reflect reality. So we've seen these mysterious forces that are driving the engine. But what about the mechanics of the engine itself? Well, the second big critique is that the model's basic rules just don't match how the world actually works. A key example of this is something called backward price indexation. To explain why inflation tends to stick around, the model just assumes that if a company can't set a new price for some reason, it automatically raises the old one based on whatever inflation was last month. It's like a built-in escalator for prices, making sure they're always drifting up. Now, it's a pretty clever solution to a modeling problem. But the authors ask a really simple question. Is that what businesses actually do? And the answer is a big, resounding no. I mean, look at this chart. This is the real-world price of Angel Soft bathroom tissue. It does not drift up smoothly. It stays perfectly flat for months and months, and then bam, it suddenly jumps to a new price. Real-world data shows prices are sticky, not slowly creeping up. The model's core assumption here is, as the paper says, flatly inconsistent with the evidence. And this isn't just some small technical detail. Getting this one rule right has enormous consequences. A model with this feature tells a central bank that bringing down high inflation is going to be a long, painful process with tons of unemployment. But a model without it suggests the cost could be pretty small. The policy advice is completely different based on this one little assumption. Okay, so we've seen the mystery forces and the mechanical glitches. This brings us back to that central question. If the best map we have is this flawed, should policymakers just, throw it in the trash? The author's conclusion is pretty blunt. They say that these models, in their current form, are not yet useful for policy analysis. That's a powerful indictment of the standard tool in the entire field. But this is where the story takes a really fascinating twist. Because even though these two traditions of economics, the neoclassicals and the new Keynesians, disagree so profoundly about how to build the map, they'd have over time come to agree on where the ship should be heading. A kind of quiet convergence has happened. The actual policy advice coming out of new Keynesian models now looks remarkably similar to what neoclassicals have been arguing for decades. Both sides agree that you need clear rules. Both agree on keeping inflation low and stable. And both agree that trying to smooth out every single tiny bump in the business cycle is actually bad policy.
And this leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. If all the experts have found common ground on the best destination, how much does it really matter that their maps for getting there are still so profoundly, so fundamentally different? It's a question that really gets to the heart of what economic models are for and what the future of policymaking might look like.